Under the calm night sky, the moon hung like a silent witness among millions of stars. The atmosphere was so silent, accompanied only by the whisper of the night breeze that brought coolness to the heart's chamber. That night was no ordinary night, for there was a story being secretly written by two hearts that never tire of searching for each other. Jungkook, with eyes that held thousands of unspoken words, finally stood in front of Taehyung. He stared deeply, as if trying to find the courage he had been hiding. The silence was oppressive, yet calming, until finally a small step brought them closer. The silence, which had been an invisible wall, was broken by a simple gesture, a hug. Jungkook's hands embraced Taehyung gently, yet tightly, as if afraid to let go again. In that embrace, all questions were answered. All doubts vanished. Taehyung said nothing, but his closed eyes and his faint smile were enough to answer everything. Amidst the slow ticking of time, the hug became a new language that only the two of them understood. There were no words, no explanation, just a feeling so real. Fans might only imagine, but for the two of them, that moment was a priceless reality. That night, the stars seemed to dance brighter. The moon seemed to draw closer, and the world seemed to stop, just to make room for the love that finally dared to be expressed. It wasn't just an ordinary hug. It was a confession, an admission that the feelings they had kept in silence could no longer be contained. Jungkook broke the silence not with words, but with actions far deeper and more meaningful. Taehyung responded with a gentle grip on Jungkook's back. The touch was like a promise that they would no longer walk alone. There was a conviction flowing through every second of that embrace, a conviction that love doesn't need to be announced to the world to be real. ARMY, who had been loyal supporters, seemed to feel the energy of that moment. This simple yet meaningful intimacy thrilled the hearts of anyone who believed in the power of love. That night, Taekook became more than just a nickname, but a symbol of two souls finding their home. That embrace was the answer to all questions, and the end to all doubt. There was nothing left to question, nothing left to prove. Jungkook and Taehyung, in the simplicity of the night, had affirmed their love in the most beautiful way. Behind Taehyung's smile, there was deep gratitude. Behind Jungkook's gaze, there was unwavering determination. They knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but that night they had found a reason to persevere. For them, love wasn't about who could proclaim it louder, but who could persevere more sincerely. And that night, they chose to persevere together. That embrace became a witness, a promise, and a prayer unheard but felt powerfully in their hearts. The small steps they took afterward were filled with warmth. Jungkook no longer lowered his head as usual, and Taehyung no longer concealed his smile. There was a new light between them, a light born of the courage to be true to oneself. There may have been no cheers, no grand party, and no official announcement. But that's precisely where the beauty lies. True love doesn't always require a grand stage. Sometimes it just requires a small, quiet space and two hearts that understand each other. In the silence of the night, Jungkook whispered softly, barely audible, but enough to make Taehyung's heart flutter. A simple word, yet full of meaning. I'm here. And that was enough. Because what they needed wasn't grand promises, but a real presence. Taehyung closed his eyes tighter, feeling Jungkook's heartbeat pounding in his chest. It was the most beautiful music of the night, surpassing any song they had ever sung. Their love had found its own melody. ARMY watching from afar might have only guessed, but the vibration was so clear. Love doesn't always need to be proclaimed with shouts. Sometimes it just takes one sincere embrace to make the world believe. And that night, the world did. As the embrace slowly broke, there was no loss. Instead, a new certainty blossomed in both their hearts. The gaze they shared afterward was far more powerful than 1,000 words of love anyone could ever utter. The moon slowly shifted, the night creeping towards dawn. But that moment will never fade, for it has been imprinted not only in memory, but in soul. Jungkook and Taehyung have written a new chapter in their story, a chapter filled with courage and love. And for ARMY, That night will always be legendary. The night Jungkook broke the silence with a hug, the night Taehyung returned it with a smile, and the night Taekook's love asserted itself without the need for words. A simple, yet eternal embrace. A moment to be remembered forever. That night, their love was no longer just a shadow, but a reality that shone brightly under the moonlight. But beneath that silence, there was an unconcealable tremor. Jungkook felt Taehyung's body tremble slightly in his embrace, not because of the cold night, but because a deep feeling had finally found its way out. They didn't need to say anything, because the hug was more than enough to carve meaning. Taehyung opened his eyes slowly, staring at Jungkook's face, just centimeters away from his. There was a small sparkle in his eyes, a sparkle that had been hidden behind the laughter and smiles he showed the world. Now, that sparkle was clearly visible, as if to say, "I understand, I feel the same way." Time passed, but for both of them, seconds felt like they had stopped. The outside world with all its hustle and bustle seemed to have vanished. All that remained was them, in a small, intimate space. Jungkook still hadn't let go of his embrace, as if afraid that the moment was just a dream that would vanish into thin air. There were words that wanted to escape Jungkook's lips, but he held them back. He knew that night wasn't about words, but about the courage he had shown. And that courage now made Taehyung feel safer than ever. In his heart, Taehyung whispered a prayer. He hoped that night would never end, because only in Jungkook's embrace did he feel truly understood. There were no masks, no pretense, only the honesty of his heart. Jungkook gently stroked Taehyung's back, a small gesture filled with comfort. He knew there had been many things unsaid between them, but tonight, every touch had been the answer they'd been searching for. There was no more doubt, no more denial. That hug to the outside world might have been just a gesture of closeness, but to the two of them, it was the greatest confession they could make without a sound. A sign that their love had found its form, albeit simple, even without the brilliance of stage lights. And when they finally broke away from each other, there was no sense of loss. Instead, there was a growing confidence. Their eyes met, and it was as if the universe had given its blessing. They smiled, smiles born of the purest sincerity. That night, the sky held not only stars, but also the secret of love between two souls who finally dared to reveal themselves. A secret that didn't need to be announced aloud, for it was written in the heart, remembered by the moon, and felt by anyone who believed that true love always finds its way. The night slowly began to fade, the early morning air bringing a different kind of coolness. But the warmth between Jungkook and Taehyung remained unaltered by time. They remained close together, as if reluctant to allow distance to reappear between them. Something had changed that night, something that could no longer be hidden. Amidst the silence, Jungkook occasionally glanced at Taehyung with a look that was hard to explain. It wasn't mere admiration, nor was it mere affection. It was the gaze of someone who had finally found the courage to accept what they had been feeling. The look was so sincere, it gave Taehyung a sense of calm he had rarely felt from anyone. Taehyung returned the smile, a small, simple, yet meaningful smile. It was an answer, a smile that erased all doubt, as if he were silently saying, "I choose you too." And in that moment, there was no longer any distance, no more reason to hold back. The seconds seemed to drag on, but they savored them. Every breath, every glance, and every silence transformed into a language of love that could not be faked. The world may not have heard their promises, but that night was the most faithful witness to the sincerity of their hearts speaking. In the distance, the stars seemed to twinkle brighter, as if accompanying the story they were writing. The universe seemed to be blessing them, bringing a peace that was hard to describe in words. Jungkook felt lighter, as if the burden he had been holding on to had finally been released in one embrace. Taehyung, on the other hand, felt more complete. It was like the puzzle piece he had been searching for had finally found its place. He no longer felt alone, because now there was someone who sincerely embraced him, protected him, and reassured him that love was real. They didn't know how tomorrow would unfold, or what lay ahead. But that night was enough to give them a reason to persevere. True love doesn't need external reassurance. It just needs two hearts brave enough to trust each other. And under the moonlight, they finally believed that love doesn't always need to be declared, doesn't always need to be demonstrated with big words. Sometimes, the purest love just needs one hug, one look, and one belief to endure no matter what. They would always remember that night, not as the end of waiting, but as the beginning of courage. Jungkook and Taehyung had affirmed their love, not with words, not with a grand confession, but in the simplest and most beautiful way, with an unforgettable embrace. A kind of silent promise was made, a promise that that daring night would not be in vain. That from that day forward, they would walk with greater steadfastness, even if not everyone needed to know. True love doesn't always need witnesses. Sometimes it just takes two brave hearts to trust each other. Jungkook took a deep breath, staring up at the brightening sky. "Thank you," he whispered softly, so soft yet enough to make Taehyung turn his head. That simple word, though short, carried such profound meaning, a meaning of gratitude, of courage, and of love finally finding its way. Taehyung didn't respond with words. He simply took Jungkook's hand and held it tightly. In that grip, they knew there was no more doubt. There was a strength flowing, a strength that made them ready to face whatever lay ahead. And as the sunlight grew brighter, they walked side by side. There was no more distance, no more silence to separate them. All that remains are two souls who have finally found each other, with a love that is no longer hidden, but real, simple, and eternal.